Hi there, I'm Peter Millard and this is 10 Minute Workshop, where 10 minutes in the workshop is never enough. In this week's video, well, I'm continuing with the gift idea theme and we're going to be making some coasters out of plywood. Sounds rubbish, doesn't it? Just you wait, they're much better than they sound, and that's coming up next. So after MDF, birch ply is my most used sheet material. It's a fine board. You have these lovely sort of fine layers of ply, which machines really well and finishes nicely. And it's one of the cheapest sort of furniture grade boards we can get here. I know the price does vary from place to place, particularly across the world. I know. But part of the idea behind this series is that you get to use up scraps and offcuts of what you already have, and I have lots of birch ply, so I'm going to use that. Obviously, if you have lots of something else, then feel free to use that as well. What I've got is whatever oddball shapes of birch ply you have. I'm using 18mm 3/4 inch for this particular job, and we're going to rip narrow strips from this 18mm wide, so they're as wide as they are tall. So little 18mm sticks, effectively. Now, obviously, a table saw is the ideal thing to do narrow rips with, and if you've got one of those, then get on and use it. You could do this with a track saw, but if you are, then I'd advise you to make a parallel guide type of thing to make sure that those sticks stay consistent. If you haven't seen it, there's a link to my previous video on cheap jigs and parallel guides. Otherwise, then yeah, a bit of careful measuring is what you need to do. But you'll need you'll need exactly 16 of these sticks. I've made them about 350mm long, about 14 inches long, just because it was a convenient sized piece of offcut that I was using. Obviously, use whatever you've got and whatever size you want. What we're going to do with these, we're going to make these up into a sort of a log, and then wrap that log in dark hardwood. And then we're going to take slices off that and then wax it or oil it and finish it nicely. So we've got our 16 little sort of battens, our little sticks arranged. And what we're going to do with these, you can see because it's plywood, the layers go all the way around. What we're going to do something called checkerboarding. So we take one with the layers upright and we put the next one horizontal. And we do the same again and the same again. And we glue those together. So we get 4 flat pieces of whatever that is, 72mm by 18. There we are, just under 3 inches by 3/4. So we start by gluing those together.
Spreading a bead of fast grab glue with a foam roller, we can turn our 16 sticks of ply into 4 little planks, clamping them up carefully to avoid movement under pressure.
Okay, so with all those unclamped, we've got 4 little, slabs of crisscross checkerboarded plywood. What we do, we put those together so that obviously the ends go one up, one down. And don't be surprised with these if there's a little bit of imbalance here. If you need to do a little tickle with a hand plane just to get rid of a little bit of unevenness. These have actually gone together pretty well, they're not bad at all. And the next stage to do is to glue those up together as a single block.
I'm using the foam roller again to spread a thin layer of glue between the planks, then once again carefully clamping them together.
Okay, so while that's clamped up and gluing, let's talk a little bit about the dark hardwood that I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap a sort of a skin, an outer layer of dark hardwood around this, just to give it a little bit of, just to contain the pattern that you'll see come out and just to make it look prettier, really. I bought a couple of meters of this. This is Meranti. It's a plain 4x1 with a finished size of about 95 by 20mm or thereabouts. I've actually had I got that from my timber yard. It's cost me about £10 or £12. It's not an expensive hardwood. If you've got scraps of something nicer, then by all means do use it. I had my timber yard on their big boys bandsaw cut about a metre of that down in half for me. And I've cut it again, so I've got 4 little bits that will go all the way around. I did actually plane this up myself. I should have got them to run it through a planer actually, but I forgot. I planed this back by hand, and it's about that's a bit like sort of cracking an egg into a ready mixed sort of cake mix, isn't it? Makes you feel like you're doing some cooking. This is me making me feel like I'm doing a bit of woodworking by hand planing these bits. It's about 8-9 mil thick now, something like that. And when our little square log of plywood is dry, we'll do the next stage, which is to wrap that in this and then glue that up and let that dry as well. Now, you don't have to use a dark hardwood for this project. You can use just a thin piece of plywood. Use a 6 mil or a 9 or 12 mil, however big you want the coasters to go. That will work perfectly well, and I'll show you an example of how that looks when we're finished. But if you can get a few little scraps of dark hardwood of some sort, then it just finishes it off nicely and sort of contains, frames the pattern that the coaster creates.
With our block of plywood unclamped, I'm cleaning up the outsides with a hand plane, then gluing the Meranti onto opposite sides of the block, lining up opposite edges so there's an alternating overhang or lip. After the glue's dry, we can fill the opposite sides, pressing the edge of the Meranti firmly into the corner of the lip to make a nice tight join. Once dry, we can plane the lip or the overhang back and clean up the outside faces of our little square log.
Okay, so after a little bit of careful sawing and planing, what we've got is a bit like sort of Battenberg cake. It's a tasty centre surrounded by a slightly sickly outside. And what we're going to do is literally like a cake. We're going to take slices off of this. We do that over at the chop saw.
I have a false fence on the miter saw to help avoid tear out.
And that, focus. That is what you get out of it. So let's slice a few more of those up.
Taking it slow and steady, I'm cutting nicely consistent slices thanks to the stop block on our fence.
So our little log that we made earlier, about 300 mil long, 350, that's enough to yield 3 sets of half a dozen coasters at those dimensions. Plus, you get a little bonus block at the end. Don't get rid of that. We can use that for something else. But for now, we need to finish these a little bit, and that means a bit of sanding. And to do that, to start with, we're just going to use a bit of sandpaper stuck to a board.
I'm using some P120 to initially clean up the faces and edges of our coasters, and then moving on to a small orbit finish sander with P180, and finally some P320 for a super smooth finish.
So I'm going to finish these up with an Osmo oil. This is the top oil for kitchen worktops. To be honest, use whatever you've got. I've got this, works really nicely. You can use wax if you prefer that, but you'll need to reapply it fairly regularly after it soaks in, whereas an oil takes a little bit longer to dry. But once it dries hard. But this really makes this end grain pop.
I'm applying oil onto each of our coasters with a stockinette cloth, and I'm working it well into the grain, not forgetting the edges, until the full set of 6 are done.
Okay, so I'm going to leave this here for today. Fairly obviously, there's quite a bit of finishing to do here. Each of these needs to be oiled on both sides, obviously, and preferably more than one coat. Best to leave it overnight to dry as well. So there's, a decent amount of work to go on. But it's a great idea to get this sort of checkerboard design, this Battenberg cake style coaster. I really like it. I've used 3/4 inch or 18mm ply to do this one because it, obviously being fairly thick, it builds the log up very quickly, and it means that you get the result faster. If you've got a bit more time on your hands, then this is one I did earlier on. Let me see if I can focus that. With 12mm birch ply. If you do this, then you're going to need 36 little square sticks of birch ply to make that up. And again, I've just put an edging of dark hardwood around there. If you don't have any dark hardwood, then you can still use plywood. I've just done this with strips of ply. And let's focus that. You can see what we're doing. So yeah, just strips of ply and then cut into slices, as I did for all the others. I personally prefer the darker wood. It sort of contains it, but I understand that not everybody has access to that or the means to take those sort of 8-9mm slices, and I am indebted to my timber yard for running that through their big bandsaw. But that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed this little gift idea. If you did, give it a thumbs up, share it out amongst your friends, and please do consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. Or hey, just check back on a Friday when there's always something fresh up at noon. I'll see you then. Take care.